Quiet janitor stops kidnapping in subway, then quits job next day. Asterisk. The fluorescent lights of the central metro station flickered intermittently as Marcus Williams pushed his cleaning cart through the nearly empty corridors at 11:47 p.m. 3 years he had worked the night shift as a janitor for the Metropolitan Transit Authority, moving through the underground tunnels like a ghost, invisible to the few late-night commuters who hurried past without making eye contact. Marcus preferred it that way, the solitude, the routine, the predictable rhythm of mopping floors and emptying trash bins while the city slept above him. At 52 years old, Marcus had the weathered appearance of someone who had lived through more than his share of hardships. His graying hair was always neatly trimmed, his uniform always clean and pressed, and he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who took pride in his work, no matter how others might view it. He spoke only when necessary, kept his head down, and had never missed a single day of work in 3 years. Tonight felt different, though Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on why. There was a tension in the air, an electricity that made the hair on his arms stand up as he worked his way through the maze of underground passages. The usual sounds of the subway, the distant rumble of trains, the hum of ventilation systems, the occasional echo of footsteps seemed muffled and strange. It was as he rounded the corner near track 7 that he heard it. A muffled scream, quickly cut off, followed by the sound of a struggle. Marcus froze, his mop dripping dirty water onto the polished floor as he strained to listen. For a moment, there was only silence, and he wondered if he had imagined it. Then he heard it again, a young voice, desperate and terrified, calling. For help, Marcus abandoned his cart and moved quickly toward the sound, his rubber-soled shoes silent on the concrete floor. What he saw when he peered around the corner made his blood run cold. A man in a dark hoodie and a teenage girl pressed against the tiled wall of an alcove near the emergency exit. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 16, was struggling frantically while the man held a knife to her throat with one hand and covered her mouth with the other. "Stop fighting, or this gets worse," the attacker hissed, his voice echoing off the subway walls. "You're coming with me, and if you make another sound, I'll cut you right here." The girl's eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her face as she realized the hopelessness of her situation. She had been waiting for the last train home after working a late shift at a downtown restaurant, never imagining that the empty subway platform would become a nightmare. Marcus felt his heart pounding as he assessed the situation. The attacker was younger and probably stronger than him, armed with a knife and positioned in a way that gave him multiple escape routes. Any wrong move could result in the girl being seriously injured or killed. A rational person would have called 911 and waited for the police to arrive. But Marcus knew that help would come too late. That's when something inside Marcus Williams changed. The quiet, invisible janitor, who had spent 3 years avoiding confrontation, suddenly straightened his shoulders and stepped out of the shadows. "Let her go," Marcus said, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire subway corridor. "Let her go and walk away. This doesn't have to end badly. For anyone." The attacker spun around, startled by the unexpected interruption. He was in his 20s, with wild eyes and the jittery movements of someone under the influence of drugs. The knife in his hand trembled slightly as he tried to process this new threat while maintaining control of his victim. "Get the hell out of here, old man," the attacker snarled, pressing the knife closer to the girl's throat. "This is none of your business. Keep walking, or I'll kill her right now." Marcus took a step closer, his hands visible and empty, his posture non-threatening, but somehow commanding. "I can't do that," he said simply. "That girl has a family who loves her, friends who care about her, a whole life ahead of her. I won't let you take that away." The girl's eyes locked onto Marcus's face, and she saw something there that gave her hope, a steadiness, a confidence that suggested this quiet janitor was far more than he appeared to be. Despite her terror, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, as if Marcus's presence alone was enough to shift the balance of power in that underground corridor. "You don't understand," the attacker said, his voice becoming more agitated. "I need her. I have people waiting, people who will hurt me if I don't deliver. She's coming with me, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Marcus nodded slowly, as if he understood the man's desperation. "I know you're scared," he said, taking another small step forward. "I know you feel trapped, like you don't have any choices. But you do have a choice right now. You can let her go and walk away, and I'll make sure you have a head start before anyone calls the police." The attacker's grip on the knife wavered slightly. There was something about Marcus's voice, about the way he spoke without judgment or condemnation, that seemed to reach through the fog of drugs and desperation. For a moment, the man's expression softened, and it looked like he might actually consider the offer. But then his face hardened again, and he pressed the knife more firmly against the girl's throat. "No," he said, his voice rising to a near shout. "No, I can't. They'll kill me if I don't bring her. You don't understand what these people are capable of." Marcus's expression remained calm, but his eyes grew cold and focused. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. "I know exactly what kind of people you're dealing with, and I know what they do to girls like her. That's why I can't let you take her." The attacker was becoming increasingly agitated, a knife shaking in his hand as he tried to decide whether to run or fight. The girl could feel his grip loosening slightly as his attention was divided between her and Marcus, and she began to hope that she might have a chance to escape. That's when Marcus made his move. With a speed that seemed impossible for a man his age, Marcus closed the distance between himself and the attacker in 2 quick steps. His movement was so fluid and precise that it looked almost choreographed, as if he had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times before. The attacker barely had time to react before Marcus's hand clamped down on his wrist, applying pressure to a specific point that caused his fingers to go numb and the knife to clatter harmlessly to the floor. Girl stumbled away from the wall, gasping for air and freedom, while Marcus spun the attacker around and pressed him face first against the tiles. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 seconds, and the man who had seemed so dangerous moments before was now completely helpless, his arm twisted behind his back in a hold that made any resistance impossible. "Don't move, Marcus," said quietly, his voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable note of command. "If you struggle, I'll dislocate your shoulder, and trust me, you don't want that." The attacker whimpered, all his earlier bravado gone. "Please," he gasped, "please, don't hurt me. I wasn't really going to hurt her. I just needed the money." Marcus's grip didn't loosen. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tommy," the man replied, his voice muffled against the wall. "Tommy Reeves. Please, I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry." "Tommy," Marcus said, his tone almost gentle, "I'm going to let you go in a minute. When I do, you're going to walk to the exit, leave this station, and never come back. You're going to get help for your drug problem, and you're going to find a legal way to solve whatever problems you have with these people you're afraid of. Do you understand?" Tommy nodded frantically. Yes, I understand. I'll do whatever you say." Marcus looked over at the girl, who was standing a few feet away, still shaking, but no longer in immediate danger. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. She shook her head, tears still streaming down her face. "No, I'm okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thought he was going to." "You're safe now," Marcus said simply. "What's your name?" "Jessica," she replied. "Jessica Martinez. I was just trying to get home from work." Marcus nodded, then turned his attention back to Tommy. "I'm going to release you now," he said. "Remember what I told you. Walk away, get help, and never let me see you in this station again." He released Tommy's arm and stepped back, giving the man room to move. Tommy stumbled away from the wall, rubbing his wrist and looking back at Marcus with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Who are you?" Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not just a janitor. Nobody moves like that. Nobody knows how to do what you just did." Marcus's expression remained neutral. "I'm someone who doesn't like to see. Innocent people get hurt," he said. "Now go, before I change my mind about letting you walk away." Tommy didn't need to be told twice. He hurried toward the exit, glancing back once before disappearing up the stairs that led to street level. Marcus watched him go, then turned his attention to Jessica, who was still standing in the same spot, looking at him with wonder and gratitude. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" Marcus asked Jessica, his voice returning to the gentle tone he had used with her throughout the ordeal. "Sometimes the shock can mask injuries." Jessica shook her head, wiping tears from her eyes. "I'm okay, really. Just scared. I can't believe what just happened. I can't believe you." She trailed off, looking at Marcus with new eyes. "You saved my life. That man was going to take me somewhere, and I don't think I would have come back." Marcus nodded grimly. "You're probably right. Men like Tommy don't usually work alone. There are people who pay good money for young women, especially ones who won't be missed right away." The casual way he spoke about such horrors made Jessica realize that Marcus knew far more about this dark world than a subway janitor should. "How do you know about things like that?" she asked quietly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as if he was remembering something from long ago. "I used to work in a different field," he said finally. "A field where you learn about the worst things people can do to each other." Before Jessica could ask more questions, Marcus had pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. "I need to report an attempted kidnapping at Central Metro Station. Track 7, he said when the operator answered. "The victim is safe. The perpetrator has fled the scene. We need police and paramedics." As they waited for help to arrive, Marcus retrieved his cleaning cart from where he had abandoned it earlier. He began methodically cleaning up the area, erasing any signs of the struggle that had taken place. Jessica watched him work, amazed by how quickly he had returned to his role as an invisible janitor. "Why are you cleaning?" she asked. "Shouldn't we leave everything as evidence?" Marcus paused in his work. "The only evidence they need is your testimony and the security cameras," he said. "Everything else is just going to make this more complicated than it needs to be." Jessica noticed that Marcus seemed to know exactly where the security cameras were positioned, and that he had somehow managed to conduct the entire confrontation in a spot that was partially obscured from their view. It was as if he had instinctively chosen the location that would provide the most privacy for what had to be done. The police arrived within 10 minutes, followed closely by paramedics who insisted on checking Jessica for injuries, despite her protests that she was fine. Detective Ray Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the force, took charge of the scene and began interviewing both Jessica and Marcus about what had happened. "So you're telling me that you, a janitor, single-handedly disarmed and subdued an armed attacker?" Detective Morrison asked Marcus, his tone skeptical. "No offense, but that's not exactly standard janitor training." Marcus shrugged. "I took some self-defense classes when I was younger," he said simply. "Military training. You don't forget things like that." Detective Morrison made notes in his pad, but Jessica could see that he wasn't entirely satisfied with Marcus's explanation. "What branch of the military?" he asked. "Army," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Did 2 tours overseas before I got out?" The detective nodded, apparently accepting this explanation. Military training would certainly explain Marcus's ability to handle the situation, though Jessica sensed there was much more to the story than he was telling. After giving their statements to the police and ensuring that Jessica had a safe way to get home, Marcus returned to his cleaning duties as if nothing unusual had happened. Detective Morrison had taken his contact information and told him he might need to testify if Tommy Reeves was caught and brought to trial, but Marcus had simply nodded and gone back to work. Jessica, however, couldn't stop thinking about her mysterious rescuer. Before leaving the station, she had tried to thank him properly, but Marcus had brushed off her gratitude with the same quiet humility he showed in everything else. "You don't need to thank me," he had said. "I just did what anyone would do in that situation." But Jessica knew that wasn't true. Most people would have called for help and waited, or simply walked away to avoid getting involved. Marcus had risked his own life to save a stranger, and he had done it with a skill and confidence that suggested he had faced similar situations before. The next morning, Jessica returned to Central Metro Station, hoping to see Marcus again and perhaps learn more about the man who had saved her life. She found the day shift supervisor, a woman named Carol Henderson, and asked if she could speak with Marcus Williams. Carol's expression grew confused. "Marcus Williams?" she repeated. "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name working here." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. "But he works the night shift," she insisted. "He's been here for 3 years. He's about 50, gray hair, very quiet. He was here last night when—" "Oh, you mean Marcus," Carol said, her expression clearing. "Yes, he worked nights, but he quit yesterday. Came in this morning and turned in his uniform, his keys, everything. Said he was moving out of state and wouldn't be back. He quit." Jessica asked, stunned. "But why? Did he say where he was going?" Carol shook her head. "He didn't give any details. Just said his time here was done, and he needed to move on. It was strange, actually. In 3 years, he never took a sick day, never complained about anything, never caused any problems. Then, suddenly, he's gone." Jessica left the station feeling more confused than ever. Why would Marcus quit his job the day after saving her life? It didn't make sense, unless he had reasons for not wanting to attract attention to himself. That evening, Jessica returned to the station and spoke with some of the other night shift workers, hoping to learn more about Marcus. What she discovered only deepened the mystery. "Marcus was a good guy," said Frank Rodriguez, a security guard who had worked with Marcus for 2 years. "But he was private, you know. Never talked about his past, never mentioned family or friends. He just did his job and went home. Did he ever mention being in the military?" Jessica asked. Frank nodded. "Once or twice, but only in passing. He had this way of moving, this awareness of his surroundings, that made you think he'd seen combat. But he never talked about it directly." Another worker, a maintenance supervisor named Bill Chun, had a different perspective. "There was something about Marcus that always made me think he was hiding from something," Bill said. "Not like he was a criminal or anything, but like he was trying to stay invisible. He never used his real name on the work schedule, always. Just M. Williams. And he always paid for everything in cash." Jessica began to realize that Marcus Williams might not have been his real name at all. The man who had saved her life was apparently someone who had been living under an assumed identity, working a job that kept him invisible and anonymous. But why? 3 weeks after the incident, Jessica was still haunted by questions about Marcus and his sudden disappearance. She had tried searching for him online, but Marcus Williams was such a common name that she found thousands of results, none of which seemed to match the man she was looking for. It was Detective Morrison who finally provided some answers, though they only raised more questions. He called Jessica to let her know that Tommy Reeves had been arrested on drug charges in another city, and during his interrogation, he had provided some interesting information about the night of the attempted kidnapping. Reeves claims that the man who stopped him wasn't just some random janitor, Detective Morrison told Jessica over the phone. He says the guy moved like a professional, like someone with military or law enforcement training. But here's the interesting part. Reeves also says he thinks he recognized him from somewhere, but he can't remember where. Detective Morrison had done some digging into Marcus Williams's background and had discovered that while the man had indeed worked at the subway station for 3 years, his employment records were strangely sparse. The address he had given was for a small apartment that had been rented under a different name, and the references he had provided when he was hired had all turned out to be disconnected phone numbers. It's like he was a ghost, Detective Morrison said. Someone who existed just enough to get by, but not enough to leave a real trail. In my experience, people who live like that are usually running from something. Jessica had been thinking the same thing. Do you think he was in witness protection? She asked. It's possible, the detective replied. Or he could have been former law enforcement himself, someone who made enemies and had to disappear. Either way, I don't think we're going to find him unless he wants to be found. That night, Jessica returned to Central Metro Station one last time, hoping against hope that Marcus might have come back. Instead, she found a small envelope tucked behind a loose tile near Track 7, exactly where the attempted kidnapping had taken place. Her name was written on the outside in neat, careful handwriting. Inside was a brief note. Jessica, I'm glad you're safe. Sometimes good people have to disappear to protect the ones they care about. Don't look for me. Live your life. Be happy. And remember that there are still people in this world who will risk everything to protect innocence. A friend. Jessica read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She understood now that Marcus, whatever his real name was, had been someone who had dedicated his life to protecting others, even if it meant living in the shadows. His sudden departure after saving her life suggested that his heroic act had somehow compromised his carefully constructed anonymity. 6 months later, Jessica was working as a volunteer at a local women's shelter, inspired by Marcus's example to help protect vulnerable people. She never saw him again, but she sometimes felt his presence in the quiet moments when she was helping someone in need. One evening, as she was leaving the shelter, she noticed a homeless man sitting on a bench across the street. He was older, with a gray beard and worn clothes, but something about the way he sat, alert, watchful, protective, reminded her of Marcus. When their eyes met across the street, the man gave her a small nod and a gentle smile before disappearing into the crowd. Jessica never knew for certain if it was him, but she chose to believe that Marcus was still out there somewhere, still watching over people who needed protection, still being the guardian angel that the world desperately needed. The quiet janitor who had risked everything to save a stranger had taught her that true heroism doesn't seek recognition or reward. It simply does what needs to be done, then fades back into the shadows, ready to emerge again when innocence is threatened. Se esta incrivel historia de coragem silenciosa y heroismo misterioso tucu su coracal. Inscríbase en nosso canal para mais historias verdadeiras e inspiradoras. Que provam que anjos de guarda caminham entre nós todos os dias. Clique no botão de inscrição e ative as notificações para fazer parte da nossa comunidade de pessoas que acreditam no poder extraordinário da compacção humana e da intervenção divina.